Productive but intense. That's how Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland is describing trade talks that continue at this very moment in Washington. Negotiators are under pressure to reach a deal for Canada to remain in a three-way partnership with Mexico and the U.S. President Donald Trump is demanding an agreement by Friday, and today he suggested that could very well happen. The CBC's Katie Simpson has the latest.
Donald Trump's tone certainly seems to have changed when it comes to trade and Canada. The president spoke to reporters about the renegotiation of NAFTA, praising the preliminary U.S.-Mexico agreement while encouraging Canada to join that.
We have a very good relationship. They came yesterday to the White House, and we negotiated late into the evening. They're in the White House right now. We're negotiating with them right now, and they want to be a part of the deal. And we gave till Friday, and I think we're probably on track. We'll see.
The president was wrong about Canadian negotiators being at the White House today, but they were there yesterday to discuss the progress and the talks. Canada is playing a game of catch-up, going through the preliminary U.S.-Mexico deal line by line, flagging proposals they like, ideas they could live with, and deal breakers. One issue has already been flagged as a deal breaker. The U.S. is not backing down from its demand to weaken the current dispute resolution system. The issue came up when Chrystia Freeland met with her American counterpart today.
When it comes to specific issues, we have a huge amount of work to do this week. Officials are engaged now very intensively. There is a big team that is going at it.
Negotiators are trying to reach a three-way agreement by Friday. The U.S. and Mexico have threatened to move ahead without Canada if there isn't a new pact by the end of the week. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
So, should this government make concessions on dairy to get the deal done? And could there be political consequences if that happens? Earlier, I put those questions to the former Premier of Quebec, Jean Charest. Hi, Mr. Charest. Thanks for joining us again. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Vashi.
So Prime Minister Trudeau said today that there is a, quote, possibility of getting a deal signed by Friday. What do you think about that Friday deadline? Do you think it's realistic that something could actually happen between Canada and the U.S. by then?
It can happen, and let me tell you why. When negotiations like this happen, there's a cumulative effect. There's been a few years now, almost 2 years of negotiations between all three parties. So it sort of, comes down to a few key issues. And at this point, there are probably key decisions that have to be made at the political level that will happen within the next few days if things go according to Donald Trump's script.
I want to ask you about a couple of those key issues, especially supply management and dairy. We know that that is what the Trump administration wants to see some major concessions on. The Prime Minister was asked about it today. I want to play the clip of his answer and then get your reaction.
Our government and I personally will stand up to defend supply management and defend our dairy farmers. That is something that we have made very, very clear to the Americans, even though it has been very obvious that the Americans want us to get rid of supply management. I have said that that is not acceptable to us, but the negotiations continue.
So how do you interpret that answer, Mr. Charest? Is supply management a no-go in these negotiations, or should or could Canada be open to making some concessions?
Well, from the outset, the government has said that supply management is not on the table. And by the way, the American administration has been of two minds on this issue. The Secretary of Agriculture, whose name is Sonny Perdue, who knows Canada very well, knows Quebec very well, has said repeatedly that they are not asking for the dismantlement of supply management. And then you have Donald Trump, for whom supply management has become the new shiny object with which he's obsessed and keeps returning to. Where I think we will land, Vashi, in the end, is something similar to what we saw in the Canada-Europe trade agreement and the TPP, now CPTPP, the agreement we just signed with 10 other countries of the Pacific, where we opened the quota, maintain supply management, but we open a higher percentage of products that can come in to Canada tariff-free. There's the second issue that is called Class 7 products. It's a little more technical. This is a very specific category of products on which Canada recently put a tariff because products from the States were coming in under a certain milk category. And I think that on that issue, there will also be some movement. So that allows Mr. Trudeau to say, I'm protecting supply management. I'm just opening up the quota, a certain percentage, to allow more products to come in.
What is the political calculation like, though, for the federal government on this issue? And I ask because obviously it's a political issue and has been for a while, but we had Mr. Couillard this morning saying that he would sign a joint letter with leaders of Quebec's political parties expressing a united front to the federal government against any changes to supply management policies. And then he said, just watch me.
Well, there are real political issues here. And, you know, the Canadian business community waxes very eloquently about how we have to dismantle and get rid of supply management. The reality, Vashi, is that in rural Quebec and rural Ontario, other parts of the country to a lesser degree, this is a very key part of policies that are in support of the farming community. And every government, even the Conservative government that preceded this one, were very clear that there would never be a dismantlement of supply management. We are going in also to an election campaign federally within the year. Philippe Couillard is in the middle of a campaign here in Quebec, and today sent a real stern warning to the federal government that if they play around with supply management, that he will react aggressively to that. And that gives you a picture of what the political consequences may be if we are too aggressive in undoing supply management.
Do you think the two things that you mentioned, opening the quota and somehow adjusting the Chapter 7 issue, will be palatable to rural farmers, for example, in Quebec?
I think they'll accept it in the end because they'll see it as a compromise. They're not going to be happy about it. They won't be, and they can't be. But people like myself, I've always thought in the end that's where we'll probably land on supply management. The other thing, there has to be some give on this. I mean, Mr. Trump has been so obsessed with it, there has to be some movement, and this is, in the end, reasonable movement. But keep two things in mind. The Americans fund their own agricultural sector, and they subsidize dairy farmers. So if we put something on the table, it's for us to say to the American side, you have to put something on the table also. The second thing to keep in mind, Vashi, is that every single government I know of in the world, every country, always has a sector that they want to protect. In Canada, we have supply management, telecommunications, we have banking. Japan just signed a major deal with Europe, a trade deal. What did they do? They protected their rice farmers. Americans protect their sugar producers. There's always one sector out there that for whom a country wants some protection. So it's not unusual that that would happen. But will there be some movement, some compromise? Yes, I think there will be. Not as much as the Americans may want, but I think there'll be some measure of movement.
Will the federal government, you think, have to compensate dairy farmers for any concessions made like they have had to in past agreements?
Vashi, very good question, because everyone has forgotten that when the TPP was signed, the Harper government announced, I think it was close to or maybe above $4 billion worth of compensation package to Canadian farmers. $4 billion. That has sort of been forgotten since then. But there you have what may be part of the deal. The Canadian government saying we're going to open the quota a bit, we will give you compensation. The other thing, typically in negotiations on difficult issues, is a very long period of implementation, which allows for a longer period of adjustment to those who are affected by any kind of change.
So bottom line, do you expect some kind of announcement on Friday?
I'm hoping. I'm hoping there will be. The Americans are totally in control of the agenda on this. Mr. Trump has done well on that. But there could be, given the fact that a lot of issues have been resolved, and we've talked a lot about this. And if the American side is reasonable on what could be a good deal, I think it's possible. And remember, in the end, our Ambassador McNaughton in Washington described it very well, Vashi. In the end, for Donald Trump, there has to be a way for him to say, I won. And for us to make it acceptable, we have to be able to say we didn't lose. And if we reach that sort of sweet spot, well, then there may be a deal to be made by Friday.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks for your time, Mr. Charest.
Thank you, Vashi.